The Women's Parliament is now in session, and the members whom we have with us today are Funto Ajijola, who is a first-year student currently studying law at the University of Reading. After her undergraduate studies, she plans to undertake a master's degree in international law whilst training at the bar. Funto believes that advocacy runs in her blood, and she has always been passionate about the idea of giving voices to those who are voiceless, especially those in marginalised communities, which is why she hopes and will become a barrister who serves in international courts like the International Court of Justice, the ICJ. In her spare time, Funto loves to write about foreign affairs on her blog and to read literary fiction novels. Elizabeth Mae Gappi. Elizabeth Mae is currently pursuing a law degree at the University of Reading with aspirations to become a legal research assistant and to further her studies by undertaking a master's degree in law. Proud of her heritage, she serves as Vice President of the university's Filipino Society while striving to influence and enrich communities. Elizabeth Mae is passionate about providing a voice for those who are unheard, advocating for marginalised groups and striving to make a positive impact. Known for her dedication to empowering others, she hopes to inspire meaningful change and motivate others to do the same. Akshaya Nithiyapalan is from Canada. She is 26 years old, a sociology major from York University. Currently, Akshaya is a final law student at the University of Buckingham. During her time at university, she has actively contributed to campus life, serving as an events director for the Law Society, a student ambassador, as bar staff, library auxiliary, and the previous undergraduate student representative. Following her law degree, Akshaya plans to pursue a legal career in Canada, focusing on human rights law, property law, and family law. She has many hobbies, such as playing the veena, the oldest instrument in India. She has played in many events, including a ceremony welcoming the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi alongside former Prime Minister of Canada, Stephen Harper. Another hobby is dancing. She was part of her previous university's, that is York University dancing team, and where she competed with other universities across Ontario in Canada. She was awarded the Duke of Edinburgh's award from her secondary school, that is high school, for her outstanding community involvement. In 1995, the Parliament passed the Pensions Act, overturning the state pension age for women in the United Kingdom, which from 1940 had been 60 years of age, with men at 65. The change was to come in about 20 years' time. The government had all that time to advise women of the change, particularly the women born in the 1950s, who were selected specifically to wear the transition, having to rearrange their retirement plans and to pray that they could retain their jobs or get new ones when they hit 60 years of age without the pension. The government failed abysmally and did not tell women of the change. Some found out casually from other workers just before they hit 60 years. Kris Gibson is a woman born in the 1950s who has campaigned tirelessly for justice for 1950s born women who were targeted to bear the brunt of the changes to the state pension age for women. Real justice must include recognition of both discrimination against the 1950s women and ongoing maladministration by the Department of Works and Pensions, whose job it is, whose role it is to administer pensions. Kris was part of the team that supported two People's Tribunals, the first in 2021, the CEDAW People's Tribunal, that is, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, that People's Tribunal, examining the extent to which women's and girls' human rights, and in particular CEDAW, are implemented in the United Kingdom. And the second People's Tribunal in 2022, the CEDAW in Law People's Tribunal, specifically examining the impact of changes in state pension age on women born in the 1950s. Mahima Matikola. Mahima is an international student from the Mauritius and has future plans in qualifying as a barrister in England and Wales, as well as pursuing a Master of Laws degree and LLM in Finance and Commercial Law. Mahima has always felt that despite being in the 21st century, the issue of gender inequality remains a significant concern in major countries, an example she notes as Afghanistan, and we might say potentially Syria. Mahima hopes one day to be able to bring a change, allowing for more young girls and women to believe that cerebral opportunity it is for everyone. Hana Mosavie is the founder of Pomegranate House, a global governance consultancy that focuses on the betterment of both women and men by looking at the cultural need of change and economic empowerment. Hana is a seasoned researcher, having spent 15 years in a variety of specialisms, from policy to report writing to fundraising on mental health, children's health, sexual abuse, domestic abuse, refugees, post-ISIS, Middle East and prevention, BAME, that is, Black and minority ethnic persons of that background, and graduate employment, as well as working in the charity sector. Hana also built a fledgling charity into a middle-sized operational charity that helps vulnerable groups to access the surplus foods and hot meals. Hana is currently a visiting lecturer for the MBA Master of Business Administration programs and has just stopped her PhD, which she is translating into a book on the decolonial feminist perspective of intersections of economy, culture, and gender identity. Hana is a member of the Chartered Managers Institute for Women in London and South East of England board. She is a member of the British International Students Association, that is BISA, and she is a member of BPS, the British Psychological Society. Isabelle Clover is a first-year law student at the University of Reading who is one day hoping to qualify and will qualify as a barrister. Isabelle has always been an enthusiastic public speaker who enjoys the opportunity to speak out on issues affecting others, specifically those which affect females in modern-day Britain. In regularly becoming involved in mooting and advocacy around the campus, Isabelle has learned lots about the power of using your voice to enact change. She is hopeful that one day her future career will allow her to do exactly that and to improve women's rights for the better. Nikki Modie-Nwaefulu, MSc and FHEA, Master of Science and FHEA, is a lecturer at BPP University. She is a PhD student at the University of Buckingham. She is author of Measuring Success in a Non-Government Institution Using the Balanced Scale Scorecard. She is also proprietor of the Victorious Women's Charity Foundation, a charity that focuses on women's empowerment and advocacy. She is also interested in gender culture in legislation and government institutions. Her PhD thesis topic is the influence of gender culture in GBV, that is gender-based violence law, and exploration of the Nigerian Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act of 2015. Grace Omondi is a dedicated first-year law student at the University of Reading with aspirations of pursuing a career in corporate and commercial law. Driven by her passion for legal intricacies and business dynamics, she aims to contribute meaningfully to the field after completing her undergraduate degree. She is also considering furthering her expertise through a master's program. Grace is deeply committed to raising awareness about the injustices faced by women and is dedicated to understanding the profound impact these struggles have on their lives. Wandoo Aibangbee is a lawyer and chartered secretary. She is passionate about women and children. Wandoo has used her senior management role in the microfinance sector to advance the cause of women's empowerment. She is currently pursuing a PhD in law centred around custodial rights of widows, and a chapter that she has written is being published on the denial of rights and respect in southern Nigeria. It will appear in a volume, Women, Power and Autonomy, Rights, Respect and Representation in Law and Society. Aimee Donoghue is currently studying law at the University of Reading and has future plans to pursue a master's degree in law. After completing her education, she wishes to begin teaching in order to pass on her passion for law to the younger generation. She has always been passionate about women's rights, and it is very important to her to help to improve representation for women in the justice system. Simone Michaud is an international business consultant and civil mediator. She is a former student ambassador of the LLM, that is the master's degree program in the University of Buckingham. Simone aims to spread the word regarding equality for women and girls globally and to continue the true fight for equality. Hana Murphy is a DipPhil psychology student, and she passed her Viva in August this year, 2024. She teaches since the year 2015 at Buckingham, the University of Buckingham, at the Oxford Summer School and in Green's College at Oxford. Hana says that while she enjoys psychology, she is also interested in law and forensic psychology, and the topic of her PhD, or DPhil, is the lived experience of dyslexia and the role of working memory in the understanding of social inference. Dr. Natalie Turney is a lecturer in company law at the University of Reading. Her areas of research are predominantly corporate law and policy and insurance law. This year, in the year 2024, Natalie was a delegate to the UN, that is the United Nations Women UK, in CEDAW 68, that is the Commission on the Status of Women 68, and Natalie was participating online in that delegate role. In the year 2024, Natalie was also a participant in the UN Civil Society Conference in Nairobi, Kenya. Earlier this year, Natalie spoke in Parliament on the matter of directors' responsibility for corporate wrongdoing. She attends the Women's Parliament to discuss the treatment of women within companies and representation of women and girls in corporate policy. So those are the members of the Women's Parliament held this day, Monday the 9th of December 2024. This is the day before International Human Rights Day, the 10th of December, and this is the day that ends the United Nations 16 days of action to end violence against women. This is also the year before 30 days of the Beijing Platform and Declaration, which was agreed to by governments at the 4th International Conference of Women held in Beijing in 1995. That conference was, as I said, the 4th International United Nations Conference of Women. It followed from the 1975 conference that was held in Mexico in the year of women's rights. That was IYW, the International Women's Year, or the International Year of the Woman, 1975. That was followed by the conference in Copenhagen, which was the second International Women's Conference. And that was followed by the third International Women's Conference in 1985 in Nairobi, in Kenya. And this action culminated in the conference in Beijing. The motion today is based on the platform and declaration that was agreed to by governments in 1995. And next year will be the 30th year of the existence of that Beijing platform and declaration. And governments will be attending at the United Nations, the CSW, the Commission on the Status of Women, to report on where they stand and how they've advanced in terms of achieving over 30 years the Beijing platform and declaration. Our conference today, our Women's Parliament, is therefore addressing this motion. The Women's Parliament, sitting on Monday the 9th of December at Buckingham in Buckinghamshire in the Moot Court at the University of Buckingham Law School first, notes that the United Kingdom, 1, in 1995, endorsed and signed the Beijing Platform and Declaration of Action. 2, endorses and supports the UN 16 Days of Action to End Violence Against Women, the 25th of November to the 9th of December 2024. We note that the United Kingdom has committed to implementing the provisions of the Beijing Declaration and Platform of Action, and 4, that the United Kingdom has undertaken to take positive steps to end violence against women. B, this Women's Parliament observes that, consistent with the foregoing, the United Kingdom government must recognise and acknowledge that whatever steps have been taken since 1995, these have been insufficient to act effectively on A, women in poverty, B, education and training of women, C, women in health, D, violence against women, E, women in armed conflict, F, women and the economy, and G, women in power and decision-making, as well as H, institutional mechanisms for the advancement of women, I, the human rights of women, J, women and the media, K, women and the environment, and L, the girl child. All those are contained within the Beijing Platform and Declaration. So C, this Women's Parliament demands that the United Kingdom government acts immediately to institute action to end the pay gap and pensions gap consistent with its undertakings in relation to the Beijing Platform and Declaration, that it acts immediately to end the pay gap and pensions gap by, first, instituting work skills value inquiries, WSVEs, to assess the work skills developed and exercised by women in traditional women's industries such as care work, childcare, librarianship, teaching, hairdressing, secretarial work, sales, shop sales, cleaning, hospitality, and all areas of work where women's skills are undervalued and underpaid. And B, the ending of the pay gap and the pensions gap must be undertaken by the United Kingdom government in setting quotas for equal numbers of women on all government decision-making bodies, boards and committees, and all private sector and corporate boards, with a target date consistent with CEDAW General Recommendation GR40. That is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, General Recommendation 40, which declares that all countries should ensure that equal numbers of women sit on these boards and committees and take place equally in decision making. This Women's Parliament demands that the United Kingdom government, resolving in mediation with women born in the 1950s the dispute arising from discrimination and maladministration in the implementation of the change of women's state pension age from 60 to 65. And this Women's Parliament demands that the United Kingdom government reviews, updates and consolidates first legislation addressing cyber-based violence against women to demonstrate its commitment to ending this pernicious attack on women's rights, women's safety, women's security and women's well-being, and reviews, updates and consolidates B, legislation addressing unlawful killing to ensure that women have equal access to the law of self-defence, taking into account the battered woman reality, and that men are not excused from murder by allowing an excuse of a partner's alleged infidelity, what other matters and circumstances are alleged, so that Section 55, subsection 6, paragraph C of the relevant legislation, that the fact that a thing done or said constituted sexual infidelity is to be disregarded is properly implemented as intended and as contradicted by the Court of Appeal in the Crown and Clinton. Furthermore, that the United Kingdom frames and implements laws, policies and practices relating to global warming, climate change, the environment and biodiversity emergencies so as to ensure that the differential impact on women and girls is incorporated, addressed and overcome. Furthermore, that the United Kingdom government establishes a Women's Advisory Council to the Prime Minister with a properly resourced, staffed and funded secretariat, a regular program of meetings with the Prime Minister and Cabinet Ministers, its members nominated by women's organisations, constituted by a minimum number of members and reflecting the 52% of the population who are women, as an institutional mechanism consistent with the Beijing Platform and Declaration of Action. Furthermore, that the United Kingdom government introduces gender budgeting and gender impact assessments into all government departments and bodies in relation to policies, practices and programs, and compulsory gender impact assessments for all laws impacting on women, and indeed all laws do impact on women. That the United Kingdom government reviews its commitment to the Beijing Platform and Declaration of Action so as to speed its implementation of its provisions and supports the holding of a United Nations International Women's Conference to formulate a platform and declaration of action to take into account the pressing need to move toward equality and human rights for all women and girls in this, the 21st century. Furthermore, consistent with the signing and ratification in 1986 of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, this United Kingdom government introduces a Women's Rights Act incorporating the provisions of CEDAW and the general recommendations of the CEDAW Committee. This is the motion before this Women's Parliament in December 2024, and I now call upon Dr. Natalie Turney to move the motion. Dr. Turney.
Thank you, Chair. It is not uncommon to see discussions on gender gaps, as referred to in our motion today, met with an instinctive reaction and rejection of the notion that women are paid less than men. And despite, in many instances, the lack of truth in this response, this signals a stark misunderstanding of the meaning of the term gender gap, which is unsurprising, given that the term feminism is also so widely misunderstood and misinterpreted. There is an incomprehensible aversion to the topic of gender equality, that people can be convinced that feminism is a campaign to see men become less than women, that people approach with nonchalance, fact, and pass it off as fiction. But conversations on gender gaps are more than a study on pay per role. These gaps symbolise the real gaps in protection between men and women. Where women earn less than men, considering the hours of professional and domestic work performed, they are more likely to suffer from a lack of financial independence, making them increasingly reliant upon male counterparts and exposing them to financial and otherwise abusive relationships. But the conversation of gender gaps is more than the pay gap. The pay gap leads to the pensions gap, with less money earned and career breaks leading to smaller pension pots. And these gaps further exacerbate what has come to be known as the insurance gap. Women face additional hurdles in accessing insurance provision, which is often obtained to remedy a lack of financial wherewithal upon certain or uncertain events. Access to affordable insurance provision, affordable insurance policies is a notoriously difficult task in low-income households. Micro-insurance offers coverage by way of social protection in absence of adequate local or national support schemes. Ola Ayekun notes the outcome of 2 instances of illness in the African region, of Mary Anyango, who died of typhoid in Kenya, and Betty Waswa, who survived complications during the delivery of her child. Waswa survived, though both she and Anyango earned a daily wage of $2 US because she had micro-insurance coverage. Protection in absence of social insurance and/or state-led schemes is thus vital in order to combat the disproportionate impact of events on women. Frequently operating as risk managers of the home, this is a pertinent option in managing risk in a low-income setting. When women are protected and households are protected, the collateral impact on the wider family network and community is overwhelmingly positive. Indeed, the benefits to the insurance industry of offering greater protection to women is huge, forecast at over $1 trillion by 2030. Yet women remain underrepresented as covered parties across an array of insurance products. When out of employment and undertaking unpaid domestic and care work, many women will not take steps to obtain life insurance, though such provision is typically available. Women are also hugely underrepresented in income protection cover. Access to insurance, though, does not simply mean the ability to purchase policies. It means finding suitable coverage under the policies when the need to claim arises. According to the European Insurance and Occupational Pensions Authority, 45% of female consumers consider themselves unfairly targeted by exclusions in insurance contracts, and this is seen particularly in the case of rural women and migrant women. As the insurance industry is driven largely by the market, a responsibility lies on insurers as corporations to address the discriminatory effect of policy wording and to explore the impact of drafting and claims practices in their assessments of operational impact on consumers and stakeholders. Although this is largely self-regulatory, there is arguably scope for oversight and/or supervision by regulatory bodies in this regard. It is clear the insurance industry can do more to contribute to the protection of women, but we must also acknowledge the criticality of social protection schemes in safeguarding women's independence. It is crucial to note that continued cuts to social security benefits disproportionately impact women, as women are twice as reliant on social security due to comparatively lower incomes, longer lives, violence against women, and time devoted to unpaid work. For the protection of women, Chair, I now move the motion.
Thank you, Dr. Turney. And I now call upon Hana Mosavie to deliver her speech in support of the motion. Thank you, Hana.
Thank you very much. Today I'm going to be talking about the progress since 1995 regarding economy and also the financial abuse that we can see. Progress since 1995 is really quite interesting. So in 1995, women held 11.3% of parliamentary seats globally. By 2022, we were able to see that it risen to 26.4%. Global pay gap is currently at 20%, whereas in 1995 it was at 30%. So this could have been significantly improved. But the interesting economic disparities that we've seen is really that women on average still spend 3 times more, as many hours than men in unpaid care roles and in domestic work. And it's not actually changed since 1995. If anything, it's gotten significantly worse, with $10.8 trillion annually lost in this unpaid work. So we can see different areas of society that impact women and impact our economic involvement in the world. And during COVID-19, we saw a significant impact on the pink collar crisis. So a lot of SME groups, so small and middle-sized enterprises, were led by women, and they were the ones that were directly impacted because of COVID's, lack of ability to interact with one another. And within India, there was cases that you could see people that had to stop their SMEs in some way or another and had to go back to rural communities very quickly into the crisis, which had pushed back decades of empowerment within a week. And this would be very hard to get this further on. So as we are in the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, the idea is looking at then an economic aspect of gender-based violence, which goes into economic or financial abuse. So obviously with violence against women, you've got 1 in 3 women globally have experienced physical or sexual violence at some point in their life, and that stat hasn't changed since 1990. And again, these are the women that have reported it. As I'm pretty sure we all know, many people have never reported anything like that. And so with digital violence increasing, you've also got the economic inequalities that we've seen. So in 1995, women's global labour force participation was 54%, and now it stands at 47%, which has largely been impacted by structural barriers that have, again, as mentioned, recent economic impacts such as COVID-19. So you then have intersectional areas that are really quite interesting, intersectional barriers. So marginalised groups, particularly women in Global South, they kind of continue to face restrictions due to access to financial systems or even access to land. So an interesting aspect is that women only own 15% of agricultural land globally, despite representing over 40% of the global labour force. So financial abuse affects 95% of all domestic abuse cases, but obviously it impacts a lot more individuals that we may not necessarily have to be involved in domestic abuse, but they're a part of the whole process. So what's very interesting is In the UK, 1 in 6 women have experienced financial abuse from a current partner or former partner. And one of the aspects of financial abuse is the debt that is highly associated to these relationships. So on average, it's £27,000 that a victim or survivor gains after the demise of this abusive relationship. A lot of these are associated with then related to mental health and the fallout after a domestically abusive relationship and how to regain that. So with that £27,000, you then have to consider the gender pay gap, the accessibility of women going into the workforce, and then also maybe childcare that are associated with it. So 40% of survivors report long-term impact on employment, and 1 in 3 survivors end up having to give up their house because of it. So very much like the American care system, we can see there's 1,188 Americans that have been able to access healthcare, a healthcare provider, because of a marriage. And in that, we don't have known data to show how many people are staying in abusive relationships purely to access healthcare. There are so many systemic aspects that we are relating to economy and financial abuse that a lot of these colonial systems have kept in place that are impacting women, that are impacting our ability to actually live a healthy and prosperous life. And that goes into domestic abuse that may not necessarily be directed from the state, but it doesn't allow us to have the access, to have the freedom that we should deserve, that we should be deserved. So these, a lot of these different things that are going on are really quite impactful that we need to consider. And this is one of the aspects of financial abuse that is incredibly important to remember and regurgitate when discussing any other aspect of abuse. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hana Mosavie. And now I would like to call upon Wandoo Aibangbee to present her support of the motion. Thank you, Wandoo.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be talking this afternoon about women in poverty. When we talk about poverty, a lot of us think it's just destitution. Poverty goes beyond destitution. Poverty encompasses women that can eat, can clothe themselves, can take care of their families. In 1995 at the conference, poverty was a critical concern. 30 years on, it hasn't changed. It is still a critical concern. Globally, about 10% live in poverty. And by 2030, the percentage is just going to change by 2 to about 8%, as has been estimated by the UN. In the UK, 52% of the estimated 69 million are women, and an estimated 21%, that's about 14 million women, live in poverty compared to men. While it seems the UK would have flouted itself in the last 30 years, thinking it has done a lot to improve the situation of poverty, this is below expectations, as the issue of low wages still linger on. Women still remain in low-paying jobs in the retail sector. The gender gap issues that have been spoken about is still there, and we hope it goes away soon. Women spend a lot of time in childcare and domestic care, taking care of their children, taking care of their home. These are expectations, and sometimes this comes with culture, making them lose working time and depriving them of income they can earn. These obligations, however, affect women, and they are not able to balance the work-life situation, and you find themselves staying home. We must deliberately look at occupational segregation and systemic segregation. This is happening, even though the data doesn't state it clearly or is not readily available. We find that certain positions are left for men and certain positions are left for women. You have situations where secretarial roles are left for women, and these are low-paying jobs. You also find underrepresentation of women in public and political positions. For instance, in Nigeria, in the political position, the Senate and the House of Rep, you have about less than 10% of women. And these women, because they are so few, they are not able to make laws that will be beneficial to the women. And the men would not support them make those laws for women and improve the lives of these women. In the UK, you have the Equality Act, which tries to improve the lives and the work women do. We also have the UK's International Women and Girls Strategy aiming to better the lives of women. But still, women earn 14.9% less than men. They have very little access to social protection, and 31.9% are moderately or severely insecure regarding food compared to men. In December 2023, actually, the UN Envoy on Poverty in the UK had stated that the UK was in violation of international law due to its poverty levels. These poverty levels remain because of the rising cost of living, not only in the UK, across the world. Globally, you also have culture, religion that reduce women to a certain standard, and they're not able to do things for themselves. Chair, for the improvement of women in poverty, I now move.
Thank you, Wandoo Aibangbee, and I will now call upon Kris Gibson to make her presentation in support of the motion. Thank you, Kris.
Thank you, Chair. How do you, as an older woman, ensure that your voice is heard and that your representatives are given a platform? How do you ensure that international and domestic laws, when clearly on your side, are applied effectively? How do you hold Parliament to account when your rights have been breached? It's ironic that the Beijing Declaration was signed in 1995, in the same year that a Parliament consisting of fewer than 10% of women was pushing through legislation to equalise state pension age. Parts of the motion point out the lack of progress in the relative wealth of older women. Targeting the pay gap whilst nothing proactive is being done about women's pensions is not enough, as the causes of the pensions gap are not confined to pay inequality, as you've already heard. And in any case, this would write off several more generations of women before any impact is felt in pensions. My main focus, however, is on resolving through mediation with 50s women the dispute arising from the changes in state pension age that targeted this particular cohort. 3 challenges. Where is the engagement with implementing the core principle of CEDAW to ensure substantive equality? Those who formulate policy must understand that this refers to outcomes and that gender impact assessments are essential. The second is inequality in decision-making roles. But CEDAW General Recommendation 40 was recently adopted and puts a fresh obligation on government to ensure women have an equal role in decisions affecting them, such as redress for 50s women. The Human Rights Council recently discussed representation of minorities. 50s women are frustrated that they're misrepresented in Parliament and by the media, who refuse to recognise the impact of discrimination. The newest embodiment of WASPI campaign represents fewer than 10% of 50s women. So who is being permitted to speak and voice the concerns of the 90% plus? Ministers must be pressed to engage in mediation as a lawful means to resolve this dispute, with representation in the best interest of all 50s women by CEDAW-in-law, who hold extensive evidence of both direct discrimination and ongoing maladministration. What opportunities are there? 50s women need to join the ranks of other women of a certain age in knowing their rights and holding Parliament to account for the abuse they've suffered. MPs who are supposed to represent their constituents must be made aware that the majority of 50s women will not accept that compensation based only on partial maladministration will remotely represent justice, as the Ombudsman never considered discrimination. CEDAW in law is making several submissions to the UN, one under the optional protocol on behalf of all 50s women, including evidence from the two people's tribunals. Second, a contribution to a call for a new convention on the human rights of older persons. And third, in train at the moment alongside Just Fair, based on the economic, social and cultural rights that prohibits measures that are discriminatory in effect, no matter the intent. And note that that's about outcomes again. The Prime Minister said, you cannot be a lawmaker and a lawbreaker. But CEDAW in law's legal team found former Secretary of State for Work and Pensions' refusal to accept reasonable invitations to mediation to be unlawful. A response from the new Secretary of State is awaited. Will the government adhere to the new civil society covenant and the civil procedure rules that promote the use of alternative dispute resolution to settle complaints? And will they agree to mediation talks with CEDAW in law through a neutral mediator? Will government lawyers be encouraged to give honest, even if sometimes uncomfortable, advice to ministers under the new rule of law guidance? And finally, will the current Parliament recognise the obligations of endorsing the Beijing Declaration and remedy the injustice to 50s women? I support the motion.
Thank you, Kris Gibson. And I now call upon Akshaya Nithiyapalan to present her support for the motion. Thank you, Akshaya.
Thank you, Chair. It has been almost 30 years since the Beijing Declaration. This is not just an anniversary. It's a rallying cry for change. The vision of a world where women stand shoulder to shoulder with men in leadership remains unfulfilled. The world is not the same as it was in 1995 when the Beijing Declaration was adopted. Section G, which called for women's equal participation in power and decision-making, was revolutionary then. It recognized that women's voices in leadership are essential for achieving democracy, justice, and sustainable development. But now it demands urgent and bold updates to match the challenges of the modern world today. In 1995, the global community agreed that the participation of women in power and decision-making is not optional, but essential. Essential for democracy, essential for justice, and essential for building societies that reflect the voices, concerns, and aspirations for all. Nevertheless, here we are 30 years later, and women remain systematically excluded from the highest levels of governance, corporate leadership, and decision-making tables. Looking at the Interparliamentary Union, IPU Parli, as of November 1st, 2024, women hold just 26.9% of seats in lower or single parliamentary chambers worldwide, and hold just 27.4% of seats in upper parliamentary chambers, with a global average of only 27% across all parliamentary chambers combined. Women's voices in boardrooms, cabinets, and critical decision-making bodies remain muted, and this is not merely a failure of representation. It is a profound failure of democracy. When women are absent from decisions that shape economies, laws, and societies, half the population is left behind. While women's representation in leadership is gradually increasing, a new and insidious threat undermines this progress: cyber-based violence. Women leaders, particularly those in politics, are subjected to relentless online abuse that threatens their safety and silences their voices. A 2024 report by the Center for Countering Digital Hate CCDH, analyzed over 560,000 comments on Instagram posts of 10 prominent female US politicians. The study revealed that over 20,000 comments were toxic, including sexist and racist abuse, as well as death and rape threats. This form of abuse is not limited to one country or region. It is a global epidemic. According to the Interparliamentary Union, IPU, 82% of women parliamentarians have reported experiencing psychological violence ranging from sexist remarks to direct threats and harassment. The IPU's findings confirm that this violence is not simply a personal issue. It is a systemic attack on women in leadership that discourages their participation and undermines democracy itself. Cyber-based volume is a modern weapon of intimidation, specifically targeting women in positions of influence. Unlike traditional forms of harassment, this abuse is relentless, anonymous, and amplified by technology. It forces women leaders to endure constant threats to their safety, while also demanding that they navigate public scrutiny far harsher than their male counterparts. As a result, many women are silenced, discouraged, or driven out of the leadership roles entirely. When women are excluded and silenced, decision-making processes lose diverse perspectives and fail to address the circumstances of half the population. Young women observing the abuse their role models face are discouraged from entering leadership roles, creating a generational gap in progress toward equality. We cannot allow these challenges to persist. To bring Section G of the Beijing Platform into the modern era, we must strengthen legislation and enforcement to combat cyber-based violence, ensuring that platforms and governments take accountability for protecting women leaders. We must ensure equal support for women in leadership, providing security, mental health support, and digital protections to those facing harassment. The Beijing Platform for Action envisioned a world where women lead on equal footing with men. Yet cyber-based violence, sexism, and harassment threaten this progress at every step. Addressing these challenges is not just about protecting individuals, it is about safeguarding democracy, justice, and equality for all. We cannot allow intimidation to win, and we will not accept a future where women are silenced. Chair, I stand today in support of this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Akshaya Nithiyapalan. And I now call upon Mahima Matikola to make her presentation in support of the motion. Thank you, Mahima.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Today, I stand before you to shed light on an issue that affects half of humanity, women's access to healthcare. Despite global progress in many fields, millions of women continue to face barriers that endanger their lives. Let us begin with the facts. According to the World Health Organization, WHO, at least 800 women die every single day from preventable causes related to death and childbirth, with 94% of these deaths occurring in low and middle-income countries. Imagine the scale of this tragedy. Every 2 minutes, somewhere in the world, a mother is lost due to reasons we have the knowledge, tools, resources to prevent. Access to sexual and reproductive health services remains alarmingly limited. In sub-Saharan Africa, over 45 million women of reproductive age have an unmet need for contraception, which leads to unplanned pregnancies or unsafe abortions. In Afghanistan as well, the maternal mortality rate is a staggering 620 deaths per 100,000 live births, compared to 3 in developed countries like Norway or even the United Kingdom. These disparities highlight a harsh truth. Geography is destiny. Where a woman lives often determines whether she is going to live. But the problem extends beyond reproductive health. Chronic diseases such as cervical and breast cancer disproportionately impact women in developing nations, yet screening programs are scarce. For example, while early screening has drastically reduced high-income countries, women in poor countries account for 90% of the global cancer deaths. Additionally, cultural and systemic barriers play a huge role. In India, nearly 50% of women delay seeking medical care because of financial dependence on their husbands or societal restrictions. In rural Pakistan, women are often unable to visit health facilities because there are simply no female doctors. Only 25% of the country's registered doctors are women, despite women comprising the majority of the medical school graduates. And then came a tipping point, the COVID-19 pandemic. The lockdown disrupted prenatal care, contraceptive access, and cancer screenings, worsening women's health outcomes. Many faced rising risk from unplanned pregnancies and untreated chronic conditions. Female healthcare workers, 70% of the frontline workforce, often lack proper equipment, adding to the strain. While these challenges are more pronounced in low and middle income countries, women in developed nations also face certain inequities, such as disparities in mental health support and gender-specific medical research. Initiatives like the Women's Bill of Rights in the UK are vital steps towards addressing these gaps and inspiring global change. There are additionally certain success stories which have been achieved in countries like Rwanda or Kenya. For example, in Rwanda, a concerted effort to improve maternal health led to a 70% reduction in maternal mortality over the past 2 decades, thanks to investment in healthcare infrastructure as well as a community outreach. However, whilst battles were won, the war rages on. Much more needs to be done. Addressing those challenges requires a global commitment to equitable healthcare. Education is key. Empowering women with knowledge about their health rights can help break cultural barriers. In closing, let us remember that healthcare, it is not a privilege, but it is a fundamental human right. The health of women, it is the backbone of healthy families, societies, as well as economies. By investing in their well-being, we invest in a brighter and a more equitable future for everyone. A future not for the few, not for the many, but for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahima Matikola. Thank you. And now I call upon Hana Murphy to make her presentation in support of the motion. Thank you, Hana.
Thank you, Chair. So, the United Kingdom agreed with and signed the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action in 1995, a global commitment aiming to advance women's rights and create gender equality. Whilst the declaration is comprehensive and explores many areas, I will focus on the commitment to eliminate violence against women and girls. The Beijing Platform and Declaration for Action acknowledges the vital importance of ending violence against women, and it's important to link to this women's health. The platform says women have the right to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. The enjoyment of this right is vital to their life and well-being and their ability to participate in all areas of public and private life. They also state that violence against women is an obstacle to the achievement of the objectives of equality, development and peace. Violence against women both violates and impairs or nullifies the enjoyment by women of their human rights and fundamental freedoms. And the UK has taken positive steps in the commitment to eliminate violence against women and girls with the Domestic Abuse Act of 2021. And this includes the creation of a definition of domestic abuse, containing both physical abuse and psychological abuse. This contains coercive control, emotional violence and controlling behaviour, and also includes economic abuse, cyber abuse, and for things like revenge porn. Another positive step is that this Act is designed to protect victims of domestic violence while holding the perpetrator more accountable. The Act recognises that abuse can occur between intimate partners or even family members of any gender and of any sexual orientation. Furthermore, the Act highlights that children who witness and experience domestic violence can be recognised as victims
due to the substantial impact and experience will have had on their lives. The Domestic Abuse Act 2021 requires authorities to provide a safe accommodation and support for any victims, and it gives the court increased powers to impose more serious penalties on the offenders. Yet do these laws, however good they are, and however much effort with good intention to end violence against women, actually work? The reality of implementing the laws and declarations mean there are challenges and areas that do still need to be improved to end violence against women and girls. Despite legislative policies, and the rates of domestic abuse and sexual violence against women remain high in the UK. The Crime Survey for England and Wales estimated that domestic violence affected at least 1.4 million women aged 16 or above in 2023. Unfortunately, that meant there was no significant change to the prevalence rate from the previous year. The Crime Survey for England and Wales recorded 889,918 domestic abuse-related crimes, but only 51,288 were prosecuted. This means that 838,630 domestic abuse-related crimes against women were left as nothing more than reports. Furthermore, 53,207 prosecutions occurred in the year ending March 2022, showing that as time has gone on, there has been a decrease of nearly 2,000 prosecutions. These statistics show that whilst laws have been introduced, the commitment to eliminate violence against women and girls seems to have weakened. This could be due to a lack of many reasons, including cuts in funding, cuts in the police service, or even failure of the commitment to implement enforcement laws designed and created to protect women against violence. And this shows the commitment to the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action in 1995 has been insufficient. To emphasise again, 838,636 domestic violence crimes against women over the age of 16 in 2023 were recorded with no prosecution following the report. This shows, in a way that cannot be denied, that the commitment to the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action in 1995 has been insufficient. This is emphasised even further when considering the number of women who have suffered in only 1 year, let alone if we were to consider all of the women who have reported domestic violent crimes with no prosecution since 1995. So what the true record has been over almost 30 years since the Beijing conference, where Hillary Clinton declared women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights, when we don't know. Women do not report such crimes in the first instance, and others never report these crimes at all. And this is due to the fear of consequences, maybe the lack of support and judgment. So these statistics are simply a rough estimate for the number of women who experience coercive control, emotional violence and controlling behaviour, or economic or cyber violence, or even physical abuse. Women do not feel that they can rely on the justice system, and the statistics show us just how many women and girls have been failed, even when they do report a crime. The government must act to ensure the Beijing Platform and Declaration is honoured to the full. So with this in mind, I support the motion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Hana Mosavie. And I'd now like to call upon Nikki Modie-Nwaefulu to make her presentation in support of the motion.
Thank you, Chair. In support of the motion and following on from Anna, because my paper also is about gender-based violence, but I would more or less focus, probably look at CEDAW and the fact that the critical issue of GBV, UK being a member state, has not fully implemented a direct legislation to deal with GBV, as detailed not only in Beijing Declaration, but also in CEDAW. So there is a trend of the UK not fully implementing these international conventions that have a substantive equality approach. Now, with CEDAW, the committee in 2019 recommended that the United Kingdom incorporate all the provisions of the convention
into its legislation without further delay to ensure the rights of women are guaranteed. The UK haven't really taken any steps and have given the excuse that they do have a domestic law that are able to cope with GBV, being the Equality Act and the Domestic Violence Act 2021. Now, UK has not adopted the general principles. They have adopted some areas of CEDAW, but not the general principles to deal with non-discrimination, substantive equality, state obligation. Those are the three pillars of implementation, which they have found difficult. So there is a divergent approach here in Britain. Wales, of course, continue to implement CEDAW and are looking to fully implement the provisions of CEDAW. Scotland has also published a report of its commitment to implement the full provisions of CEDAW, but Britain hasn't. So you have that divergent approach of the application of CEDAW in the United Kingdom. So what are the consequences of this? It becomes very apparent that there is a gap and there is a problem with the United Kingdom. In 2020, it says a woman was killed by a man every 3 days in the UK. So statistics show domestic homicides between 2012 and 2019 found that 52% of victims had contacted the police prior to their killing, and the police were unable to intervene. The trend continues to show in 2023, women were the victim in 73.4% of domestic abuse related cases. Over the course of that year, 1.4 million women, that's 5.7%, compared to 751,000 men, that's 3.2%, aged over 16 years experienced domestic abuse. Now, the Centre for Justice Innovation finds that survivors from Black and minoritized backgrounds may experience even greater prevalence of certain forms of domestic violence. I mean, there's further data, Anna's mentioned, quite a few. So this shows that the UK is not able to resolve the social issue of gender-based violence and domestic violence. There is a big problem. The UK, even being a member state to the various global conventions on equality, is showing that it has an incapability to control GBV and domestic violence. If we look at the paper on the 25th, I just picked this up in the Metro, 25th of November, it says enough. Every 11 minutes a woman or girl is killed in their own home. Now it's time for action to end the epidemic of violence. Another Metro paper, this is December 4th, very, very recent. You can see CAN says, I'll target abusers to make women feel safe. So Britain has more or less acknowledged that there is a problem, but the issue is that they are members of the Beijing Declaration and also CEDAW. So why do we still have this problem? Now, the UK's foundation to equality is based on formal equality, which focuses on individual merit-based comparison of opportunity, while substantive equality, which we have in most international conventions, most especially Beijing and CEDAW, moves away from individual merit-based comparison towards group equality of outcomes. Substantive equality is the foundation of all these global conventions. It considers different backgrounds and historical injustice faced by persons or groups, aiming for their fair outcomes through moral principles. Unlike formal equality, which treats everyone the same, substantive equality can include affirmative action and quote systems. So a state like the United Kingdom that has its foundations on formal equality are struggling to actually incorporate the full provisions of CEDAW. So we have, there must be an enforceable fine to states such as the United Kingdom that do not comply to the Convention rules. The lack of enforceability brings about uneven protection for women, most especially in the United Kingdom. States move from gender-neutral stance of formality equality to a more outcome-based stance of substantive equality as seen in CEDAW, with more affirmative actions and quotas for women in male-dominated decision-making and legislative areas. A lot of work still needs to be done. We have to look at the cause and not deal with it than treat the symptoms. The United Kingdom has to approach equality in a substantive approach in order to enforce the full provisions of CEDAW and provide women with the full protection. In this, I'm in support of the motion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nikki Modie-Nwaefulu. And now I'd like to call upon Isabelle Clover for her presentation in support of the motion. Thank you, Isabelle Clover.
Thank you, Chair. A woman who is mistreated so severely that they end up living in constant fear for their life is a woman who is tested to her limits each and every day. Self-preservation, it is instinctual, and importantly, it is an instinct that both women and men share. In the face of possible death, whether from a particularly violent slap, a kick, or a beating, this instinct kicks in, and yet the law does not consider women as they do men in how they respond to this fear. If a woman loses control at the hand of a man's violence and his life is lost in how she defends herself at the hands of his mistreatment, the law treats her less favourably than a man attempting to use the same self-defence. The fear of extreme violence at the hands of a partner. How many women find themselves in this position, feeling so severely for their safety? A feeling that should be felt by nobody, and yet the statistics suggest feeling as such is far from uncommon. The National Centre for Domestic Abuse reported that in the year ending March 2022, in England and Wales, the police reported approximately 1.5 million incidents related to domestic abuse. How much fear was felt by the 1.5 million victims to these incidents? It is immeasurable. No formula exists to determine exactly how much and what this looked like, yet fear is a universal thing. It looks differently on everyone, but nevertheless, it affects everyone. Its all-consuming nature can all too easily mean that women feel there is no escape route. The femicide census found that when men kill women, they are more than 50% likely to have previously had an intimate relationship with them, or be engaged in one at the time of the homicide. Intimacy is not, and will likely never be a reason that allows a woman to completely let her guard down. That is the sad reality, that fearing for her safety is not an irrational fear. When the breaking point is reached and a man is killed by a woman, she cannot rely on successfully getting her sentence of murder reduced to manslaughter if a weapon is used. Despite being physically weaker than men, in using a weapon to match a man with physical power, it appears an attack is, apparently on the surface, premeditated. Even if they are deemed to be a domestic abuse survivor, which is their strength and the defying of odds against everything. If a female domestic abuse survivor kills to survive, she loses the power behind this phrase. The use of a weapon detracts from this, and it paints the woman who acts as she does out of fear and lack of choice as a villain, a survivor in reality, but in the minds of others, not so in the positive sense of the word. Loss of control. In considering these words that when written in this order can reduce a charge of murder to the lesser offence of manslaughter, the power held within them is evident. However, do the requirements necessary to fulfil this partial defence favour the man seeking the reduced sentence, rather than the female domestic abuse survivor? If once a qualifying trigger is proven, a person who is like the defendant in every way reacts as the defendant has done and kills, then the objective requirement is fulfilled. However, confirming what a hypothetical female domestic abuse survivor would do is much more difficult. As previously discussed, we come back to fear again, an emotion that can override absolutely everything. It looks differently on everyone, but it nevertheless affects everyone. One female of, let us say, 42,
may endure a beating, whilst another female of the same age may try to run, and another female, also of 42, may put an end to it, fear the serious violence that they are being repeatedly subjected to, and resolve to end that violence against them. Fearing domestic violence looks differently on different women. Being of the same age and having gone through the same hardship does not guarantee the same reaction. But this should not mean that a woman who has killed an abuser with a weapon to assist her, as a result of lacking the physical strength to do so alone, should be convicted of murder. The fear of serious violence is very real because it is her reality, day in and day out. Is a woman losing control, or would it instead be better to see her as acting in self-defense to the violence she is falling victim to of at the hands of a man? I support the motion, and I one day hope that women who kill as a last resort, in self-defense and not limited by the law, if the conduct is carried out as a consequence of being subjected to this unspeakable domestic violence, where a woman constantly finds herself living in fear for her safety. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Isabelle Clover. And I now call upon Elizabeth Mae Gappi to make her presentation in support of the motion.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
I want you to think about 10 individuals. To you and I, this can be considered a small amount compared to the billions of people in the world. Yet, with a grim reality, this is approximately how many women in England and Wales experience sexual violence every single hour within every single day. Globally, 1 in 3 women across their lifetime are subjected to violence. A number remains seemingly unchanged. Additionally, according to the Crime Survey of England and Wales, the latest updated report shows that 3.3% of women aged 16 and over were victims of sexual assault or attempted sexual assault. These statistics, out of the 1 million reported cases, there were an estimated 798,000 women. Now, although I can list all of these facts from all of these sources, looking deeper into them as a collective, they vary from each other. They're different. Truthfully, they are far from the reality. It does not nearly compare to the amount of attacks that have not been reported by those who are afraid to tell their story, scared that they might not even be believed, by those who fall at the hands of manipulation and are forced into silence. Despite increased awareness, significant systematic barriers prevent survivors from speaking out and seeking justice. The very fact that sexual violence continues to be a growing issue highlights the urgent need for improvement, not just in policies, but in societal attitudes and behaviors. It should be a universal standard that women should not have to be in fear of suddenly being sexually assaulted by anyone, whether it be someone that they know and trust or a stranger. Throughout history, sexual violence against women has been a persistent and devastating reality that leaves deep scars across generations. Not even a century ago, the atrocities of World War II's comfort women served a heartbreaking reminder of when Imperial Japanese troops kidnapped and enslaved women from countries like Korea, Australia, China, the Philippines, and many more. You can't help but wonder, how did our society become so fractured that such atrocities were normalized? This starts with questioning how sexual violence against women was seen as a concept. No human is born a perpetrator of sexual violence. Most are taught and shaped by harmful influences, cultural complacency, and societal failure. Despite modern legislation and preventative measures, sexual violence continues to thrive in the shadows. Despite modern research from Women's Aid states that nearly a quarter of young people aged 18 to 25 disagreed with the statement, you should always have consent from your partner to have sex when you are in a relationship. A statistic like this shows failure in collective responsibility. It demands urgent action in the form of more comprehensive mandatory educational programs to equip young people with a critical understanding of consent and safe relationships. The stark reality today demands that we start holding our cultures, education systems, standards, and communities accountable for what they influence
and teach, or fail to teach, about consent, respect, and human dignity. A case that has caught the eye of the world is that of Madame Petticoat, where 51 men have been accused of raping her unconscious body through a disgusting operation set by her husband. The excuses amount to things such as, "It's not me you should be angry at, it's your husband." I thought she was in on the game. It was indeed a trial of cowardice. The Petticoat trial displayed her bravery in facing each rapist in court, reminding us to persevere and remain strong, and not to chain these experiences to who we are. However, we must not ignore that there are devastating effects on mental health, leaving survivors with deep psychological, physical trauma, as well as emotional pain. There's a crushing feeling in the pit of your stomach where you start questioning yourself. Did this happen to me? How did this happen to me? Is it my fault this has happened to me? What could I have done to prevent this? The perpetuating cycle swirls in your head like a broken record. We must emphasize the urgent need and importance of enhanced support systems, including more robust programs and intensive therapy tailored to address the profound trauma caused by sexual violence, reminding victims it is not their fault and it never will be. These initiatives must go beyond surface-level interventions to offer survivors long-term healing, resilience building, and an opportunity to reclaim their lives at their own pace. Survivors like Madame Petticoat show incredible courage, but it is society's responsibility to ensure the necessary tools and support to rebuild their mental well-being. And so we continue to put society and those in legislative power on trial for crimes and handlings of sexual violence against women. What does this say about our society when half of its population lives in paranoia of sexual violence? Sexual violence against women is not at the fault of the women themselves. It is a societal failure. We must aim to envision a world where safety and dignity are universal rights. These statistics are not just numbers. They are mothers, their sisters, their daughters, their best friends, their colleagues, the people we hold closest to in our hearts. They deserve to be protected and supported. Remember those 10 individuals? They represent 1 hour of suffering and the thousands of voices silenced every year. It's time to listen, act, and ensure that safety and dignity are not privileges, but rights for every woman, everywhere. Thank you. Support for peace.
Thank you, Elizabeth Mae Gappi. And now I'd like to call upon Aimee Donoghue to make her presentation in support of the motion. Thank you, Aimee.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to start with a question. What were you wearing? This is the question that so many rape victims have been asked. It's the question that has become so standard and yet remains so damning. This is an attempt to shift the blame onto the victim because of their behaviour or what they were wearing. This is an attempt to let a criminal walk free. Our mothers all told us to be careful, to make sure we never walked alone, especially at night. We all know the horror stories. We've all been told at least one. Every day, girls are kidnapped, raped, and murdered for no reason other than being in the wrong place at the wrong time. 3 years ago, this is what happened to Sarah Everard. She was kidnapped, raped, and murdered by the police officer, Wayne Couzens. He carried out a false arrest under the ruse of her breaking lockdown restrictions. This was a blatant abuse of power. How are the public, especially women, supposed to trust the police when incidents like this are, unfortunately, not uncommon? There were opportunities that should have been taken in previous years when Mr. Couzens displayed indecent behaviour to remove him from the force, but these opportunities were not taken. This was a terrible failure by the police to protect all of Mr. Couzens' victims. Why is it that a woman's life had to be ended for something to finally be done? Wayne Couzens, David Carrick, Martin Forshaw. These are just a few names of the men who have murdered women while serving in the police force. This serves as a grim reminder that there has not just been one incident, this is a troubling pattern. If the police force continues to contain men such as these, then they will never be able to be fully trusted. It is not just one man that has slipped through the cracks, whose behaviour has been missed. So many police officers have breached the public's trust by committing these crimes, and the number just seems to rise. This means that the trust that the public have in those who swore to serve and protect will just continue to crumble. Sarah Everard's death sparked national outrage and made it apparent that something must change. She was just a woman walking home from her friend's house. She did not deserve this. No one deserves this. Sarah is just one of countless women who have faced violence, but unfortunately, women are so rarely listened to in these situations, and as a result are vastly underrepresented in our justice system. So many women are subjected to being dragged through the courts and have their experiences dismissed because people find it easier to blame the victim rather than the perpetrator. And it is not uncommon for women to feel as though they are unable to speak up about the acts of violence that they are subjected to. And this is a result of the lack of action that the police take. A recent report conducted by Rape Crisis found that between the 1st of July 2023 and 30th of June 2024, a mere 2.7% of rape cases led to someone being charged, let alone convicted. So many victims fail to receive the justice that they deserve. I want justice for every woman who was too scared to come forward about what happened to her. I want justice for every woman who had to make the horrific choice to face her abuser in court. Women should not have to fight as hard as they have to in order to get a conviction. We need this to change. For our daughters, for our granddaughters. They should not have to hear the horror stories that we have all heard. They should not have to be taught to be wary of walking alone. They should be allowed to feel safe wherever they go. Their future starts with us. Change starts with us. So for these reasons, I second the motion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Aimee Donoghue. And now I call upon Simone Michaud to present her statement in support of the motion. Thank you, Simone.
Ladies and gentlemen, honored delegates, Madam Chairperson, today we gather on the momentous occasion of the Women's Parliament. We reflect on pressing global issues, the urgent need to advance gender equality and combat violence against women. As we commemorate the Beijing +30 and observe the final day of the UN 16 Day of Action to End Violence Against Women, we must confront the sobering truth. The fight for gender equality and eradication of violence against women remains incomplete. In 1995, the United Kingdom pledged its commitment to the Beijing Declaration and platform an action vowing to uphold women's rights and take decisive steps towards equality. However, despite notable progress, the reality today reveals a gap between promises and outcome. The challenges we face today are real. As we've heard from the voices in this room, these issues identified in the Beijing Declaration remains disturbingly relevant. Women continue to be disproportionately impacted by poverty, denied equality, education, and healthcare. And we face systemic barriers in the economic system. Violence against women, including cyber-based violence. It persists and it sustains on our collective conscience as women, as we go to our jobs and as we carry out our day-to-day tasks. Women in armed conflicts and environmental crisis endure hardship that demands immediate redress. The gender gap and pension disparities perpetrate economic inequality. While undervaluation of work traditionally performed by women undermines their contribution to society. These systematic inequalities are not just about women. They are barriers to advancement of our collective humanity. My call for action today is that the government is to be held accountable. It needs to commit to the fight to equality for women. Today, I echo the demand of this Parliament. One, we must address inequality immediately by implementing work skills values, encouraged to rectify the undervaluation of women's work in traditionally female-dominated industries. Quotas for women in leadership must become a norm, ensuring parity in decision making. Two, we must combat violence against women, strengthening legislation that targets cyber-based violence. We must also strengthen laws that prevent women from defending themselves from abuse. Environmental justice. We must frame policies that consider the disproportionate impact of climate change on women and girls, ensuring their voices shape our environment and the responses to us in the legal system. Institutional mechanisms. We must establish a woman advocacy council to the Prime Minister, reflecting the lived experience and expertise of women across the nation, and introduce gender budgeting and impact assessment across government departments. We must codify women's rights. It is time for the Women's Rights Act to enshrine the provisions of the CEDAW and the general recommendation of the UK law, ensuring legal foundation for equality. My vision, our vision as women, to me, is that a policy for us as women, for young girls all around the world, should be collective and representative of our diversity in this country. The inequalities faced by women are neither inevitable nor is it insurmountable. The United Kingdom has the resources, the talent, and the political commitment to lead the world in achieving gender equality. To our lawmakers, I say, let today be the turning point where rhetoric transforms into action. To every woman and girl, I say, your rights are not negotiable. Your voices are essential, and your future must be equitable. Together, we can build a society where gender equality is not a distant goal, but a present reality. Let us resolve to make the next 30 years a testament to our collective commitment to justice, equality, the elimination of violence against women, and for our collective growth. I support the motion.
Thank you, Simone Michaud. And now I'd like to call upon Grace Omondi to make her presentation in support of the motion. Thank you, Grace.
Do not leave your drink unattended. Avoid running in secluded areas at night. Check the number plate of your taxi before getting in. And always share your location. As women, we are taught that being hyper-aware can ensure our safety. But what should we tell women and girls in conflict zones, where according to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, 79% of human trafficking in conflict-affected countries involves exploitation for sexual slavery? To highlight the disturbing reality of conflict-related sexual violence, consider a testimony from a United Nations anthology titled, in their own words, Voices of Survivors of Conflict-Related Sexual Violence and Service Providers. This collection contains 150 first-hand accounts of survivors spanning from events from 1992 to the present day. Reading through as many accounts as I could bear, I could not begin to reiterate how profoundly devastating they all were. One harrowing testimony facilitated by the United Nations Integrated Office in Haiti describes the ordeal of a 19-year-old young woman from Cité Soleil, Haiti. Her name remains anonymous in the anthology. Her home was sprayed with bullets and set ablaze during clashes between rival gangs. Forced to flee with her family, she became separated from them in the chaos. Alone in an unfamiliar territory, she was intercepted by a group of armed men who brutally beat and sexually assaulted her for hours on end, whilst interrogating her about matters she knew nothing about. After the assault, she managed to reach a nearby square where displaced people had gathered for shelter. There, she was fortunately reunited with her father. However, the aftermath of her ordeal revealed another layer of suffering. The lack of access to adequate health care. Her father did not have the means to take her to a medical facility, a tragic reality displayed by the state of Haiti's health sector. Armed violence has devastated healthcare infrastructure in Haiti, leading to the closure of 63 health facilities nationwide. Less than a third of healthcare centres in the capital are currently operational, according to a United Nations report on the humanitarian crisis in Haiti. If we look across the ocean, over 10,000 kilometres away in Sudan, we can see the same concerns on how 67% of healthcare facilities in Sudan have been affected by the war between rival military factions. This young woman's story is just the tip on the iceberg of the pervasive exploitation women endure in conflict zones, where sexual violence on women and girls is systematically used as a tactic of war. Her experience reflects the broader grim reality of gendered violence in conflict, violence that often leaves survivors without the resources or support they need to desperately heal. This issue is not limited to the perpetrators who commit these acts, but extends deeply into the political frameworks of the governments involved and the nations claiming to uphold women's rights. The United Kingdom's commitment under the Beijing Declaration to prevent gender-based violence in armed conflict has been undermined by its actions. An example can be in the updated article by the Campaign Against Arms Trade, the CAAT. The UK has continued to facilitate Saudi Arabia's military operations, providing arms to the coalition, despite overwhelming evidence of violations of international humanitarian law, including indiscriminate airstrikes targeting civilians in Yemen.
These actions highlight the UK's failure to adequately assess the impact of these actions, like arms exports to conflict zones, and how it would affect civilians. By enabling airstrikes that devastate civilian infrastructure, including hospitals, food supplies, shelters, and more, the government directly undermines its stated pledge to prevent harm to women and girls in conflict areas. Failure to align matters like its arms trade policies with its commitment to the Beijing Declaration and the Arms Trade Treaty is just one example of the domino effect that systematic negligence creates in the fight to aid women who suffer from conflict-related violence. And with that, I second the motion.
Thank you indeed, Grace Omondi. And now I ask Funto Ajijola if you would make her presentation in support of the motion. Thank you. Thank you, Funto.
Thank you, Chair. Women continue to pay the price for the wars of men. This was said by the UN Women Executive Director, Simone Michaud, and the current political state of the world's countries proves her right. As of right now, in 2024, the world is facing the highest number of conflicts globally since World War II, with the Middle East and North Africa accounting for more than 45 of those conflicts, Africa taking 35, Asia taking 21, Europe taking 7, and Latin America taking 6. These include the Israeli-conducted genocide ongoing in Gaza, the unrelenting violence by Rwanda-backed M23 rebels in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, Yemen experiencing the world's worst humanitarian crisis, according to the United Nations, the Sudanese civil war that broke out a year ago, and Russia's ongoing invasion of Ukraine. And these are just the conflicts that make the headlines. So what about the ones that don't? Whilst our world leaders remain slack-jawed and weak-kneed with their hunger for bloodshed and violence and their reluctancy to champion peace and civility, women are killed like flies. And not directly because of the conflict, but the blatant disregard for international law, such as the Declaration on the Protection of Women and Children in Emergency and Armed Conflict, that is designed to protect women and children during wars and conflicts. However, in the instance of sexual violence used as a war tactic, the evidence is stark. Women in Sudan making the unimaginable choice of mass suicide to escape rape by the Rapid Support Forces militia. Women and children fleeing deadly violence in Eastern Congo, reporting gruesome sexual attacks and genital mutilation by armed men using tree branches, guns, and knives. And the denial of basic necessities, sanitary products, food, clothes, medicine, to women and children in Gaza. The impact of conflict on these women in these regions is clear. It intensifies existing discrimination and puts their fundamental human rights at a greater risk. And the evidence continues to grow. It's a harrowing but very true fact that we will always have growing evidence demonstrating the suffering of women caught in areas stricken by conflict globally. Women continue to lick their wounds, tending gingerly to their vaginal lacerations due to forced penetration from rapes, struggling to survive giving birth to children without sufficient sanitary equipment, making the decision to kill themselves or to escape the debilitating fear of rape and sexual assault, failing to breastfeed infants due to malnutrition, and for them, there's no time for grief. There's no time for tears. What ties these women together is not just their continued suffering, but their longings for survival and peace in a world where they serve simultaneously as A, collateral damage to the violence that erupts around them, and B, as cannon fodder to perpetuate the hungry spirits of bloodshed and inequality. I am here to dispel the argument of proximity. This argument that being in a place of privilege automatically constitutes one's blatant ignorance of what is going on around them, simply because their rights and freedoms haven't been outrightly extinguished as a response to outbreak of massive violence in their home countries. Fighting for the rights of women held in some of the most forcibly ostracized and dangerous places on the planet isn't some itch that can be scratched away after we sort out our own problems. It's not something that can be remembered in passing or should be remembered in passing. as though the lives of these women matter less than the lives of the women we can see, women I can see in this room, the women I see outside of this room, the lives we see on our way to schools, to our places of work, safely, and may I repeat, safely, navigating the streets of the United Kingdom. We are the voices of these women, and we must act as such. We must act, and they need us to act. Only through our united stance as women, who refuse to be complacent in the suffering of our sisters, will we be able to make a future of lasting peace more visible and increase funding for bolder, more political action, forcing the hands of those in power to turn the clock forward on bringing refuge and reparation to women trapped in conflict areas. And with this in mind, I second the motion.
Thank you, Funto Ajijola. Thank you. Thank you. Please be upstanding to second the motion.
I second the motion.
Thank you. The motion is passed unanimously. And now I thank the Women's Parliament. The motion has now been passed unanimously. I thank the Women's Parliament, the voice of reason. The voice of reason is a woman's voice, loudly resonating, voicing feminist claims, feminist demands down the ages. Spoken, voiced, enunciated, heard. Yet too often not even acknowledged, too often ignored, too often not listened to, yet resonating loudly. Christine de Pizan, not Christopher. Matilda Jocelyn Gage, not Martin Jamie. Vida Goldstein, not Victor. Adela Pankhurst, not Adam. Emily Wilding Davison, not Emmanuel Winston. Sojourner Truth, not Samuel. Mary Wollstonecraft, not Morris. Mary Shelley, not Michael. Francis Wright, not Frank. Balaram Das, not Benjamin. Laura Sarita, not Lawrence. Isabella de Vanella, not Ian. Lucrezia Marinella, not Lance. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, not Ephraim. Susan B. Anthony, not Solomon B. How many more names should we celebrate? How many more names should we recall? Can we recall? How many more names lost, forgotten, to be resurrected? Here today at the Women's Parliament in December, on the 9th of December in the year 2024, we celebrate them all, along with ourselves, tailing on a magnificent history, her story of every woman before us who holds out her arms to us, welcoming us into the fold of the feminists of fame and sorority. Her arms, their arms, pushing us forward, pressing us on to keep going in strength and fortitude. Heroines with voice, every one of them, and as heroines of history and herstory, we make sure that their voices are added to by our voices. Voices today in the Women's Parliament requiring, entreating, claiming and, in one great chorus, demanding that governments globally honour the rights of women, honour the rights of girl children, reserve a place for all, everyone, in a global recognition of rights, humanity, personhood. The voice of reason, the voice of women, the voice of women as human will be heard. And I thank you, women all, the members of the Women's Parliament, sitting here this day, the 9th of December 2024. And the Women's Parliament is now adjourned. Thank you.